She heard the word, "Get out," and for a moment, Emma Callahan stood frozen on the cold marble floor of the 40th level office in Carver International, her trembling hands clutching the stack of financial reports she had labored over for 3 long weeks, reports that now seemed to hold no value at all. Numbers Nicholas Carver had brushed aside with 2 brief words that struck her pride like a slap across the face. "Nick, please, if you would just look again. I told you to get out." His voice was ice, rigid as steel, his pale gray eyes refusing to meet hers as he turned away, folding his arms behind his back while he stood before the wide glass window that overlooked a city drowning in rain. "Walk home, and think about whether you are truly fit for this job." A chill crawled down Emma's spine. Outside, rain was pouring as if the sky itself had split open, and the clock on the wall had just struck 11 at night. She had no car. She had taken the subway because he was the one who told her they would be working late. "But it's raining so hard. I'm wearing heels. The trains have stopped. Then you should have planned better." He still did not turn around. "Walk home. You will have plenty of time to ask yourself whether you deserve this position. I do not tolerate carelessness. And these numbers are trash." Those numbers were not trash. Emma knew that with every exhausted cell in her body. She had checked each figure 3 times, reconciled every account, and stayed awake until 3 in the morning for 2 straight weeks to make sure everything was flawless. But Nicholas Carver could never be questioned, and she had made the mistake of pointing out an irregularity in one of his subsidiary companies, a discrepancy that revealed someone was embezzling money out of his system. She should have known better. In the 3 months she had worked as a financial analyst for Carver International, Emma had come to understand that Nicholas did not simply run an ordinary import-export empire. The rumors, the sharply dressed men arriving at hours no one should be awake, the way everyone around him moved as if they were walking on eggshells. She was not naive. She knew exactly what kind of man signed her paycheck, but she needed this job more than she needed her pride. Her mother's hospital bills were strangling her day by day, and this position paid triple what she had earned at her previous company, triple what any firm would offer someone her age without nearly a decade of experience. "Please." The word escaped smaller than she meant it to. It takes 40 minutes to walk home. I didn't bring an umbrella. If you stay here 1 more minute, I will have you thrown out." This time he turned toward her, and the look in his eyes made Emma's breath catch. There was something dangerous there, something sharp enough that her survival instincts screamed in warning. 2 security guards were already waiting at the door, broad-shouldered men with cold faces and frames so large they nearly filled the doorway. Heat flared in her cheeks, a burn of humiliation. Emma clutched the reports to her chest, wanting to throw them at him, to scream that he was a heartless bastard, that she had done nothing wrong, that he was punishing her only because she had been right, but instead she turned away, walking past the guards with the last scraps of her dignity. Her heels struck the marble floor. Click, click, click. Each step echoing through the vast hallway like a countdown to the collapse of her career. The descent from the 40th level to the ground floor felt like a long free fall. Her reflection in the polished steel elevator doors made her throat tighten. 27 years old, her brown hair coming undone from the neat bun she had pinned it into, mascara smudging as she fought back tears. She would not cry. Not in this building. Not because of that man. The night security guard at the lobby did not bother to lift his head as she pushed through the revolving door. Rain slapped against her skin like blows delivered straight from the sky, soaking through her thin blazer and silk blouse in seconds. Her hair was drenched, clinging to her face, her carefully applied makeup dissolving into dark streaks. The folder in her arms began to fall apart, ink bleeding into blue-black streams like veins of spilled blood. 40 minutes. She could walk 40 minutes. Emma started forward, her heels splashing through puddles that swallowed the sidewalk. The street was empty. Most people were wise enough not to be outside on a night like this. Thunder rolled overhead. Emma shivered and picked up her pace, unaware that the night was far from over. Under the tearing wind and rain, as Emma's fragile silhouette wavered along the long, empty street. If you have been following this painful yet quietly resilient journey of hers, I invite you to pause with us for just a moment. If this story has touched something in you, if you wish to keep discovering what awaits Emma in the moments ahead, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video, so that the journey of this small yet fiercely determined young woman can reach even more hearts. And before we step into the next turn of her story, tell us where you are watching from, which corner of the world you are listening in. Leave a comment below so we can know how this story has found its way to you, and so we may have the strength to bring you more chapters, more thoughtful and heartfelt moments each day. Emma walked like a shadow through the unending rain of the Chicago night, each step heavy not only because her high heels were soaked through, but because of the invisible weight of humiliation pressing against her chest. Wind howled between the buildings, sweeping sheets of cold rain against her face, her skin already numbed by the chill. Her feet were so wet she could no longer feel them, yet she kept moving. She thought of her mother, of that small room in the nursing center in Michigan. That was the only person who had ever placed unwavering faith in her. And now, Emma had lost the only means to keep her alive. The sacrifices of the last few months, selling her car, the tiny studio apartment, the hunger all felt like a cruel joke now. The salary that was supposed to save them was gone. She had worked as if her life depended on it, because in truth, it did. Yet she had been pushed out into the night rain simply for doing her job correctly. Emma let out a faint, ragged laugh. She had been foolish to dream. That man had just thrown her out like a worthless beggar. A sudden gust of wind swept through, knocking her off balance so hard she nearly fell. Gripping a lamppost, she steadied herself, breathing hard, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. Her high heels were finished, one heel bent sharply to the side, her raw skin stinging where it had scraped open. Emma bent down, slipped off both shoes, and carried them in her hand. She continued barefoot through puddles, through muddy patches and scattered trash, step by step as if proving to herself that she still had control over something, no matter how small. In her hand, the file she carried had turned to pulp, the ink bleeding into dark blue and black swirls across pages clinging together. She stopped beside a sidewalk trash bin and tossed it in without hesitation. 3 weeks of work, 21 sleepless nights, hundreds of pages of data reduced to soggy waste. Everything was gone, not just the job, but her trust, her last shred of dignity. She looked up into the dark sky as the rain poured straight down her face, and for a brief moment, Emma Callahan wondered whether if she just kept walking, without stopping, she might simply disappear. No one would notice. No one would care. Not a single person, not even the man who had slammed shut the door of her world without a single explanation. But Emma was not someone who broke easily. She clenched her jaw, tightened her grip on the shoes in her hand, and kept moving. 40 minutes more, she told herself. Then she would be home. Then she would figure out what came next. She had no idea that only a few minutes later, her life would turn in a direction she could never have imagined. Emma turned into a narrow side street, where the scattered streetlights cast thin, uneven pools of light across the rain-soaked pavement, reflecting her image as a warped, nameless shadow. The rain kept falling steadily, but the wind had grown harsher, dragging along the metallic rattle of shop signs shaking violently in the storm. She folded her arms around her trembling body, her bare feet now numb to the point of feeling nothing, each step like pressing down on sharp stones. The Chicago night carried the particular cruelty of autumn, cold and indifferent. Much like the expression in Nick's eyes when he turned away from her. She looked down the length of the empty road, a hollow stretch of darkness, with nothing but the sound of rain and the hard, fast beats of her heart pounding within her chest. A car passed on the opposite side of the street, headlights sweeping briefly across the wet asphalt. Though Emma barely registered it, she no longer cared. All she wanted was to reach home, pull a blanket over herself, turn off her phone, and disappear into silence. She crossed an intersection with no traffic light, and as she reached the middle of the street, everything unfolded like a nightmare. From the left, headlights burst through the dark, a sharp screech cut through the night, and a black car came barreling toward her at terrifying speed. Emma barely managed to turn her head, her eyes widening in shock, her feet seeming to root into the slick pavement. She tried to leap back, but the wind and water stole her balance, her foot sliding across the wet asphalt as her body pitched sideways. In the split second, she believed the car was about to slam directly into her chest. A force as fierce as a storm swept her backward. Her body lifted off the ground, colliding hard with the cold, wet pavement along with a stranger who had pulled her out of the car's path. A violent crash followed immediately. The speeding car slammed into a parked SUV with bone-shattering force, metal crumpling in a shrill, agonized roar. Glass exploded. Alarms wailed through the storm like screams rising from chaos. Emma lay sprawled on the freezing concrete, her head ringing, her breath breaking in ragged bursts, her entire body limp and shaking. She lifted her face, wet hair clinging to her skin, her heart pounding as if trying to tear its way out of her chest. The man who had saved her leaned close and spoke in a low, guarded murmur. "Don't move. You may be injured." She turned her head, her rain-blurred eyes meeting his. A man in his mid-30s with a sharply cut face, thick brows, and a faint scar above his left eyebrow. He was not a complete stranger. She had seen him before inside the Carver International building, one of those silent security figures who appeared only around sensitive areas. "I'm fine." Her voice shook, her breathing uneven. Her words broke off as he began speaking into his phone, his tone clipped and urgent. "There's been an incident, a block south of the main building. Emma Callahan was nearly hit. Yes, I have her. She's okay. But the driver, he fled. This wasn't an accident." Emma's body went rigid. She heard every one of those final words with startling clarity, each one slicing through her like a blade of cold metal. "Not an accident." The man continued speaking, his eyes cutting toward the fleeing car as its rear tires skidded across the wet street. "Plate number, Charlie Romeo 729. Black Lexus, tinted windows. Recorded on camera. Sending the footage now." He ended the call and turned back to her, his expression sharp with caution yet tinged with a quiet, sincere concern. "Miss Callahan, can you stand? Do you feel dizzy at all? What is happening? Were you following me?" "Orders from Mr. Carver." When one of the analysts leaves after 10 at night, especially when there are sensitive matters involved, someone is always assigned to follow. He offered his hand. "David Ruiz. And ma'am, I need to get you somewhere safe immediately. That car was clearly targeting you." Emma stared at him in shock, her heart thudding wildly. She still could not process what she had just heard. Someone had tried to kill her, and she had been saved at the last possible second by a stranger sent by Nicholas Carver himself, the same man who had thrown her out of his office less than an hour ago. Everything was happening too fast, too suddenly, too terrifyingly for her to understand what kind of story she had just stepped into. David helped Emma to her feet, his hand firm yet gentle around her elbow as if afraid she might collapse at any moment. She was still dizzy, her mind spinning, her breath broken by the shock that had not yet released its grip. Her knees were scraped and bleeding, her feet swollen from striking the cold pavement, her rain-soaked hair clinging to her cheeks, her entire body trembling from the cold and from the fear seeping into every cell. He draped his jacket over her shoulders, settling it around her with a decisive gesture, before guiding her quickly toward a narrow alleyway, where a battered gray sedan waited with its engine idling. It was a nondescript car, completely unlike the polished fleet of Carver International. David opened the rear door and ushered her inside before sliding into the driver's seat. He didn't turn on the headlights immediately, letting the car roll quietly away to blend into the traffic. Emma remained silent for a long moment, shivering in the warmth that slowly filled the cabin. Finally she spoke, her voice hoarse. "That car, the one that hit me, are you certain it was intentional? And why this car?" David kept his eyes moving, scanning the rearview mirror to ensure they weren't followed. "I am absolutely certain. That was an assassination attempt, and we are in this vehicle because it's off the books. If the person who ordered that hit is watching, they need to believe you've disappeared or were taken by an ambulance, not that you've been picked up by Nick Carver's security. Because of the report I submitted today," she whispered, her hands clasping tightly in her lap, "there is a very high possibility. We have been investigating irregularities in the financial system. Your discovery and the fact you reported it made you a threat to someone inside the organization." David glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his gaze sharp as a blade. "We know someone is siphoning funds, but we have not identified who. You stepped right into that line." Emma leaned her head against the window, closing her eyes, exhausted beyond measure. "Then why did he throw me out? Nick knows someone is watching, but he still pushed me into the rain like some sort of game?" "It is not a game," David answered slowly. "It is a test of reaction, and more importantly, it is a diversion. If the person behind this believes you have been fired, stripped of value, he might let down his guard and expose himself. But Mr. Carver never intended for you to be alone." She turned, eyes widening with disbelief. "You mean, you followed me from the moment I left the building?" "I stayed close the moment you stepped out of the elevator. 3 others were positioned along your route home. Not for a single second were you truly unprotected. But I did not expect them to act this quickly, which means you were closer to the truth than we thought." Silence settled once more inside the vehicle. Rain hammered steadily against the glass, the sweep of the wipers creating a strange rhythm within the tension-filled space. Emma felt her chest tighten, unsure whether from fear or from the truth she had just learned. "Where are we going?" "The boss's estate, outside the city. There are guards, doctors, anything you might need. Only his closest people know the address." "I do not want to go there," she murmured weakly, her voice drained of all strength. "I just want to go home." David met her gaze through the mirror. Your apartment is the most predictable destination. If I were the one trying to kill you, that is the first place I would wait." Emma said nothing more. She knew he was right, and the truth of it chilled her more deeply than the storm outside ever could. The SUV eased into a quiet suburban road where the darkness was split only by the slow, imposing movement of a massive iron gate swinging open. Beyond it lay a vast estate veiled in a thin layer of mist, the house ahead rising like an ancient fortress with warm golden light spilling from its windows, a stark contrast to the cold, rain-soaked world behind them. David cut the engine and stepped out to open her door. "We are here. For now, this is the safest place for you." Emma stepped onto the ground, her legs trembling from cold and from the quiet terror still pulsing through her. She lifted her head toward the large wooden doors before her, feeling as though she had wandered into another realm entirely, a realm of power, secrecy, and danger. And perhaps the place where something entirely unexpected was about to begin. The large door opened before David could even knock, and Emma, still disoriented, was momentarily blinded by the warm light spilling outward. The heat rushing from inside wrapped around her, melting the layer of cold that clung to her skin. But nothing stunned her more than the sight of the man standing in the center of the foyer. Nicholas Carver. No longer the cold executive seated behind a walnut desk or the indifferent silhouette turned toward rain-streaked glass, but a tall man with a white shirt clinging to his body, his hair soaked and falling over his forehead, his face wet with rain yet his eyes burning bright. He moved toward her quickly, decisively, each step driven by something far deeper than logic. She stood motionless, drenched, her mind swimming with exhaustion, dizziness, and a storm of tangled emotions. He stopped half a step from her, his gaze sweeping from the crown of her head down to her mud-stained bare feet, before settling on her wide, stunned eyes. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low and rough, almost breathless. That question, the urgency trembling beneath every syllable, was so unexpected Emma wondered if she had misheard. I'm fine," she whispered, unsure where she found the strength to speak. "My feet are scraped, and my knees might be bruised, but nothing serious." He lifted a hand, hesitating as if afraid the gesture might frighten her, then placed it lightly on her shoulder, the warmth of it startling in its gentleness. "You're freezing, Marina," he called, and instantly an older woman appeared at the end of the hall carrying towels, a robe, and slippers. "Take her to the sitting room, bring blankets, and call the doctor right away." Then he turned back to Emma, his eyes filled with the emotion she could not decipher. "I'm sorry." Those two words seemed to still the entire room. Emma looked up at him, unsure whether it was shock, confusion, or something like a fever dream playing tricks on her. You're sorry?" He nodded, his gaze never leaving her face. "I took a risk. And I know it hurt you, humiliated you, but I had no better choice." She let out a faint, bitter laugh, her body trembling either from the cold or from the anger threatening to surge again. "No better choice than throwing me out into the rain while someone is trying to kill me? That's your way of protecting people?" Nick did not look away. His expression stayed steady, though the line of his jaw tightened. "I needed them to believe you were no longer a threat, that I no longer trusted you. Without that, they would never reveal themselves. But you were never truly left alone. You were always being watched, always protected." Emma stepped back, her hands clenching so tightly her nails dug into her skin. "You wanted me to feel like I had lost everything, and you succeeded." Nick stepped forward, closing the distance until only a breath separated them. "I never wanted you to feel that way, but I had to make someone else believe it. It was the only way to keep you alive." For the first time since she had known him, Emma saw the cold mask he wore begin to fracture. Behind those gray eyes was genuine worry, unhidden by the usual steel in his voice or the practiced indifference in his expression. And that frightened her almost as much as the car that had nearly taken her life. "I don't understand," she murmured, her voice cracking. "I don't understand why I matter so much. I'm just an employee, just a name on the payroll." Nick closed his eyes briefly, as if fighting to regain control. When he opened them, he stepped back, his voice lower, rougher. "You are not just an employee, Emma, not to me." But he said nothing more. He simply turned to Marina and gestured for her to take Emma away. Emma followed the older woman in silence, her mind spinning with everything unsaid, everything she had not yet been able to grasp. She had no idea what awaited her in this unfamiliar estate, but she knew one thing with startling clarity. Nicholas Carver was not a man easily understood, and the change she had seen in his eyes tonight was the most dangerous thing she had ever encountered. Emma sat in the warm sitting room wrapped in deep brown tones. A blanket pulled around her shoulders, her feet resting on a small stool covered in soft fur, the cup of hot tea on the table before her long since cooled, though she had not noticed. Nick's private doctor had examined her, cleaned and bandaged the scrapes along her legs, and given her something for the pain, but the real injury lay somewhere far deeper than her skin. Marina had left quietly, closing the door behind her, leaving Emma alone in a room so still it seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the rain continued its steady, relentless fall, as if mirroring the night itself. She gazed into the low, crackling fire, her mind drifting back to the moment she discovered the first irregular figure. It had begun as a small discrepancy, a few $1,000s out of place, tucked neatly into a vaguely labeled category called special operational fees. But when she traced the pattern across branches in Europe and South America, the same anomaly repeated again and again. Tiny transactions, each small enough to avoid triggering automated alarms. Yet when combined, they formed a staggering sum. At first, she had assumed it was oversight, a careless entry, or a clerical mistake. She had made a note of it, attached it properly, and included it in her comprehensive report to Nick. That very report was what had gotten her thrown out into the storm. And that same report had nearly killed her. She could feel the truth forming slowly, like pieces of a puzzle shifting into place around her. She was not the first to notice, and Nick had not been unaware. On the contrary, he knew. Perhaps he had known long before she did. And maybe he was already investigating exactly what she had stumbled into by accident. The door to the room opened softly. Emma turned her head and saw Nick step inside, no longer dripping wet, but the dark shirt he wore still bore a few stubborn traces of rain. He sat in the chair opposite her, his gaze no longer sharp but carefully subdued. "You know now, don't you?" His voice was low, rough like the embers burning in the fireplace. Emma did not answer at once. She simply looked at him for a long moment before nodding lightly. "I don't understand everything, but I know what I found wasn't random. Those repeated transfers, the small amounts slipping outside the main channels. It wasn't a mistake. It was systematic." Nick leaned back, eyes drifting toward the fire. "I've been tracking them for more than 3 months. Whoever is doing this is clever, funneling money through layers of shell companies across multiple countries. Each transaction falls below the alert threshold, but when combined, the amount missing is enormous." Emma leaned slightly forward. "You don't know who's behind it? I have a list of 3 people with access to those accounts, but not enough evidence. I needed someone to spot it from the outside. Someone the traitor wouldn't suspect." "Me," Emma whispered, realizing even as she said the word that she had been the perfect link in the chain. Nick nodded without hesitation or apology. "I gave you access to the real data. I knew if anyone was sharp enough to catch it, it would be you. And you did." Part of her wanted to be angry. The other part felt only hollow. "And you didn't warn me? You said nothing? You let me walk straight into it without knowing? If I warned you, you would have behaved differently. You would have been cautious. You would have avoided the very data we needed. And they would have known you were a real threat. Your discovering it naturally and turning it in immediately panicked them. And panic leads to mistakes." Emma stared at him, her eyes dry but weighted with emotion. "Mistakes like hiring someone to kill me? Or doing it themselves?" Nick's hands tightened into fists on his knees. "I didn't think they would move so quickly. That was my miscalculation. I underestimated how desperate the traitor was." In that moment, Emma no longer saw the untouchable figure she had worked under for months. She saw a man fighting alone in the shadows, using strategy and sheer will to protect what remained of a system being eaten from within. And she, knowingly or not, had become the spark that forced the darkness to expose itself. She leaned back, exhaling slowly, her eyes fixed on him. "So, what happens next?" Nick looked up at her, his gray eyes like a winter lake cold. "Yes, but impossibly deep. Now I know for certain that the traitor won't stop, and I won't stop until I find him. But first, I need you alive. And safe." Emma said nothing, but something inside her shifted quietly, profoundly, irrevocably. Emma sat motionless in the wide armchair, the glow from the fireplace casting tremors of light across her tense face, her eyes fixed on Nick as if she were studying a stranger she had never truly known. The air in the room was thick, not with smoke or weather, but with all the things left unsaid. "I need you to understand something," Nick began after a long stretch of silence. "What I did last night throwing you out of the office, it wasn't because you did anything wrong. Quite the opposite. Your report was the final piece I had been waiting for over the past 3 months. But if I reacted the way I should have, if I praised you, kept you close, gave you deeper access than the traitor would have known I knew, and he would have vanished." Emma said nothing, only tilted her head slightly, her gaze dry and sharp as a thin blade. Nick continued, his voice low and steady. "I had to make him believe you had been cast aside, that you no longer mattered, that you were humiliated enough to give up, to walk away from the system, to disappear without being able to threaten him further." She closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them, her voice soft but colder than the rain outside. "You turned me into bait." He nodded. "Yes, but bait that was protected. I had people following you. David was always behind you. 3 others were positioned along your route. You were never in actual danger." "Actual danger?" Her voice suddenly rose, her eyes sparking with anger she had been holding down. "I was nearly run over in the middle of the street. If David had been 1 second slower, if that driver had adjusted his turn by an inch, I would be lying dead on the pavement." "Nick, and you stand there telling me I was never in actual danger?" Nick did not look away, did not retreat, but his eyes tightened as though her words struck him hard. "I know, and I would never forgive myself if that had happened. I calculated every step, but the risk went beyond what I could control." Emma stood, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, her thin frame trembling with fury. "You say you need me safe, yet you threw me into the street like a worthless pawn. Do you have any idea how I felt? Humiliated, degraded in front of your security, tossed out of the building I have given hours, sweat, and sleepless nights to." Nick rose as well, stepping toward her but keeping a careful distance, as though touching her now might cause her to shatter. "Emma, I did not see you as a pawn. I chose you because you were the only one who could make him drop his guard, and I put every layer of protection I had around you. I didn't gamble with your life. I gambled with the traitor's perception." She let out a brittle laugh, no tears falling, but her voice thinned by the weight of it. "You didn't gamble with my life? Then what about my feelings, Nick? My dignity? The trust I once had in you?" Nick fell silent. For the first time in their entire conversation, he had no answer. Emma stepped back, as if 1 step closer might break her apart. "I once believed that no matter who you were, no matter what your past looked like, you were at least someone who valued talent. I thought that if I worked hard enough, there would be a place for me, but it turns out I was just a tool." Her voice softened, but sharpened all the same. "I don't know which is worse, Nick, the fact that you made me a target, or the fact that you never once considered how I might feel through it all." He exhaled, his eyes lowering to the dark wooden floor, his expression carrying a rare trace of weariness. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong, but I will fix it. Not with promises. Promises mean nothing but with action." Emma didn't respond. She turned away, walking slowly toward the hallway, her voice drifting back soft but sharp as a blade. "I don't need you to promise anything. I need you to remember how it felt last night when you heard I almost died. If you truly felt something, anything, then let it be the last time I'm ever placed in that kind of danger. And if not..." She paused, looked over her shoulder, and the anger in her eyes had faded into something far heavier: disappointment. "Then don't expect me to stay long enough to be betrayed a second time." Then she walked away, leaving Nick standing alone in the sitting room, the fire still burning, but the space colder than it had ever been. Emma closed the door behind her, the faint click of the hinge echoing through the long, quiet hallway like a suppressed sigh rising from her own chest. The room had been arranged with unsettling care, warm in a way that almost felt deliberate, with cream-colored sheets neatly folded, a soft lamp casting gentle light against the walls, and the subtle scent of lavender lingering in the air. Everything was calm, perfect, serene to the point of making her feel strangely out of place. She did not sleep. Instead, she sat curled in the armchair by the window, a thin wool blanket resting loosely around her shoulders, her gaze fixed on the garden swallowed in darkness outside. Her mind was a tangle of anger, hurt, and confusion. Everything had happened too quickly. 36 hours earlier, she still believed that if she kept working hard, Nick would eventually recognize her worth. Now she understood she had been a piece on his board, placed carefully and pushed into the cold rain as part of a calculated and brutal test. Yet she also had not died, and she could not deny the truth. Nick had arranged for her to be protected, had acted not out of spite or punishment, but out of a need to expose someone poisoning his company from within. So which feeling was true? Emma pressed her cold palm to her forehead, closing her eyes as if she could dam the surge of thoughts inside her. She should leave, refuse everything, return to her old life. Difficult, yes, but at least familiar. But what about her mother? The medical bills she could never pay on a low-level salary, The cramped apartment that leaked whenever it rained. The endless nights kept awake by worry. Nick was not only a dangerous man, he was the only chance she had of keeping both their lives afloat. But if she stayed, what waited for her? A world full of shadows, where lives could be decided behind closed doors, where trust was a luxury, where every step might be a trap. She had never been made for power games. She loved numbers because they were clear, honest, truthful. Yet tonight she had seen something undeniable. The world that should never have been hers had a place carved out that only she seemed able to fill. No one else had found those cracks in the financial records. No one else had the mind to trace money slipping so skillfully through hidden channels. And more than that, no one else had shaken Nick Carver the way she had. Her existence alone had made him drop the mask he showed the world, revealing fractures beneath proof that he was not entirely the ruthless figure he pretended to be. Was that why she was still sitting here? Because some part of her wanted to believe he deserved someone standing on his side. Outside the window, the rain began again, fine and quiet. Emma shivered, pulling the blanket closer. She remembered the look in Nick's eyes when she told him how she felt. No excuses, no arguments, only a silent acceptance, as if every word she spoke had been true. That silence frightened her more than any anger could. Because it was real, he knew he had been wrong, and he carried that wrongness like a burden on his shoulders. Was a man like that worth trusting again? Emma rose and moved toward the desk where a brand new laptop waited. She opened it, her fingers typing into files she remembered from the backup she had made before everything fell apart. If she walked away now, the story would end here. But if she stayed, if she truly wanted to understand what was happening behind all those locked doors, if she wanted to make sure no one else paid the price for another hidden agenda, there was only one path. She had to become part of the game, not a pawn being pushed around, not a disposable piece, but the one holding the board. Emma stared at the glowing screen as the numbers appeared one by one. No more anger, no more tears, only clarity and a choice. And this time the decision belonged to her. The rain had stopped by the time Emma woke, and the soft light slipping through the heavy curtains washed the room in a muted blue-gray, as if the world outside was still hesitant to begin a new day. She shifted on the wide bed, the smooth silk of the blanket and a faint, familiar scent stirring something tight in her chest. Something had changed not only around her, but inside her as well. The door opened quietly while she was still sitting dazed at the edge of the bed, and Nick entered, holding a steaming cup of coffee, his gaze far gentler than it had been the last time they faced each other. He wore a white shirt without a tie, his hair slightly damp as though he had just showered, and for a brief moment he looked nothing like the ruthless figure the world whispered about, but like a man carrying an honest weight of remorse. He set the cup down on the bedside table, sat in the chair opposite her, and watched her in silence as if waiting for her to break the quiet first. Emma raised her eyes to him, still edged with doubt, though the fury from the night before had softened. Nick drew in a deep breath before speaking, his familiar, low, rough voice now touched with something unexpectedly gentle. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about it, about you almost getting killed, just for trying to do the right thing, and He didn't finish, only looked at her, and in his eyes was a feeling that made her chest tighten without warning. Nick was not skilled at remorse, but every word he uttered rang true. Emma lifted the cup, letting the warmth seep into her hands and ease the guardedness she still carried. Did you ever think I might not want to be dragged into this war at all? She asked, not sharply, only tired. Nick nodded, his gaze never once leaving hers. I know, and I know I have no right to ask you to trust me again. But you should understand the moment you walked into my office with those reports. I knew you were the only one who would see the truth, and once I realized that, I understood. You would no longer be safe. Emma sat silent for a long moment. His words felt like a thin curtain being drawn aside, to reveal cracks in the armor he had always worn so flawlessly. You're not just investigating someone stealing money, she said slowly, as though testing him. You're hunting a traitor you once trusted. Nick leaned back, his gaze dimming. Marcus Lane, someone I treated like a brother for nearly 20 years. She set the cup down, bracing her elbows on her knees, her fingers laced tightly together. And because of that, you pushed me away and made me bait. I didn't push you away, Nick said, cutting in, his voice dropping even lower. I hid the truth. I made you think you had failed so they would let their guard down. But I never intended for you to be alone. David, and 3 others, they followed you from the moment you left the office. Emma studied him for a long time, searching for deception or excuses in his eyes, but found only fatigue and unmasked guilt. She exhaled, feeling something inside her begin to soften despite herself. So what now? Now, you're safe here, and I need your help to finish this. Nick stood and walked toward her, then sat on the edge of the bed, not touching her, but close enough that she could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feel everything he wasn't saying. Emma, he said quietly, I know I was wrong not to tell you from the beginning, but I've learned not to trust anyone. And you make me want to break that rule. Not only because you're brilliant, but because you're not afraid of me. Because you look me in the eye and ask the questions no one else has the courage to ask. Those words were not an apology in the traditional sense, but coming from Nick, they carried far more weight. Emma lowered her head, unable to hide the weary smile tugging at her lips. Do you realize you just made someone furious enough to scream, then turned around and made them soften all over again? Nick lifted an eyebrow, relief flickering across his features. A necessary survival skill. She laughed, and for the first time since being thrown out of the office, her laughter carried no bitterness. You're taking care of me to make up for everything, aren't you? If that's what keeps you here and keeps you from hating me, then yes. Emma shook her head, but she knew the truth. The wounds inside her were already starting to knit back together. And this unnamed gentleness, the way he listened, the way he did not defend himself, was making it far harder to stay angry with him than she expected. Emma sat in the private office arranged for her inside the estate, the glow from the computer screen reflecting across her tense, focused face. Ever since her conversation with Nick that morning, the swirl of doubt inside her had shifted into a quiet, deliberate resolve. She was no longer the victim swept into someone else's power struggle. She was now the one gathering each scattered piece, threading together events that once seemed unrelated, determined to expose the traitor hiding in the shadows. The confidential files Nick had sent her came through a secure server. Emma began with the internal financial reports she had worked on before, but this time she had full access. She saw everything that had once been hidden: off-channel transactions, disguised slush funds labeled as investments, and overseas accounts established under the names of subsidiary companies. Every line of data was a breadcrumb, and Emma followed even the smallest ones. One particular pattern caught her attention: a series of small but consistent transfers from a Miami branch to an account in Luxembourg. The account name was encrypted, but Emma recognized the code. It matched a sequence she'd once seen Marcus Lane use for travel expenses. She expanded her search, digging into Marcus's travel records for the past 12 months and cross-referencing them with withdrawals from the suspicious accounts. Without a doubt, each time Marcus traveled abroad, especially to countries without extradition treaties, there was a corresponding spike in irregular withdrawals. Each amount was modest when examined alone, but when added together, the total stretched into millions. And it had been happening for nearly a full year. Emma frowned, her heartbeat quickening as a realization flickered sharply through her mind. This was no simple embezzlement. It was a fully built siphoning system, sophisticated and carefully orchestrated by someone with high-level access, someone who knew exactly how to erase footprints. She pulled out a sheet of paper, sketching a flow map of the money transfers, using different colors to mark dates, amounts, and locations. With each stroke, she became more certain Marcus was not simply stealing, he was creating a second financial network outside of Nick's control. And if what Nick had said was true, in his world betrayal was not just about money, it was a threat to lives. Emma leaned back in her chair, staring at the completed data chart, a surge of anger and grim satisfaction rising through her. She had found the trail. A link that had once seemed unbreakable now glowed unmistakably on the screen before her. Without hesitation, she gathered all the analyzed documents, printed them into a thick stack, marked the critical points, and placed them into a heavy folder. She stepped out of the office, walking down the marble-lined hallway, her pulse echoing in her palms as though her body understood the weight of what she carried. Nick was seated in the library, the warm lamp casting a tired glow across his face. But when he saw Emma walk in with the thick folder in hand, his eyes sharpened instantly. She said nothing, simply set the folder on the table in front of him. Nick opened it, flipping through the pages quickly, his brows drawing tighter with each turn. When he reached the last page, he lifted his gaze to her, and in his eyes she saw something quiet pride, mingled with concern. Emma spoke a single sentence, her voice calm but weighted. I believe we have our answer. Marcus Lane, and this is how he did it. Nick remained silent for a long moment before nodding once. Very good, leave the rest to me. But Emma knew the hardest part of all was only just beginning. Nick turned each page of the documents Emma had brought him, his eyes moving over rows of figures and charts with the precision of a man too familiar with the scent of betrayal. The air in the room seemed to freeze as the soft sound of paper turning echoed steadily, and Emma stood a few steps away, her palms tightening silently at her sides. She wasn't sure how he would react, but when Nick finally closed the folder and set it on the table with just enough force to send the nearby pen rolling, she saw something shift in his gaze. The coldness from that rain-soaked night was gone. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice low but unmistakably firm, carrying a seriousness that made Emma draw a deep breath before she nodded. Every data point was cross-checked 3 times. I ran pattern scans on all transaction traces and correlated them with encrypted codes. There's no mistake. Marcus is the one behind it. He started siphoning money from the subsidiaries more than 8 months ago. Small amounts each time, but consistent, hidden neatly under operational expenses. Nick rose, taking the folder with him as he moved toward the bookshelf behind his desk. He pulled out an old novel, and a soft click sounded as a concealed door swung open, revealing a staircase descending into the basement. "Come with me." Emma hesitated for half a heartbeat, then followed. The basement was nothing like she had imagined. There were no chains, no cold interrogation rooms. Instead, it was a modern command center, large screens displaying maps, live transaction data, personnel files, and surveillance feeds. Nick handed the folder to a man seated at a control station, his salt and pepper hair and steady presence suggesting decades spent working in the shadows. "Paul, verify everything in here. Cross-check with the original system logs. If anything is wrong, I want to know within 30 minutes. If it's correct, I want Marcus Lane's location within 10. Paul nodded, asked no questions, slipped on his headset, and began typing commands with fluid efficiency. Nick turned to Emma. "You did better than I ever expected. When I hired you, I thought I was getting a brilliant analyst. I didn't expect you to be the only one willing to stare straight into danger and follow the truth." His gaze sharpened. "But you need to understand something. From this moment on, you're no longer an outsider. You're in this deeper than you realize." "I know," Emma replied, her voice steady though her pulse thrummed beneath her skin. "I was pulled in the night you threw me out into the rain. The difference is that now I'm choosing to stay." Just then, Paul swiveled his chair. "Verified. Everything matches. Marcus is currently at the Westside branch office. He's scheduled to leave in about 20 minutes according to his car service log." Nick nodded once. "Send word to Alex and Team 6. He doesn't leave that building. Bring him to the northern isolation site, quietly. No attention." Paul confirmed and began relaying orders, the room shifting into seamless motion, as though all of this was nothing more than a routine night's work. And in that moment, Emma realized that this world of silent decisions and invisible consequences was the real world Nick lived in. Not polished meetings or tailored suits, but choices made in the dark, where one mistake could cost a life. Nick looked at her, and for a flicker of a second, something softer crossed his eyes. "You don't have to stay for the rest of this. You can go back to your room and rest." "No," she answered quietly but firmly. "At least tell me what happens to him." Nick stepped closer, bending slightly so their eyes aligned. "Marcus betrayed us. He didn't just steal. He put you in a situation that could have cost your life. Do you know how furious that makes me?" Emma didn't look away, meeting his gaze steadily. Nick's voice dropped, steady and cold. "Then hear this. He will never have another chance to hurt anyone. And this time, no one needs to pretend to survive. No performances. Only truth and justice." At dawn the next morning, when the sky outside was still wrapped in a thin, icy veil of mist, and the estate lay in the kind of silence that only power knows how to keep, Nick stepped into his private office, his expression carved in frost. Emma was already there, seated by the window with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, her eyes focused on the garden drenched in dew. She looked up at the sound of the door, meeting the blade's sharp intensity in his gaze, and she knew something had begun. "Marcus is on his way," Nick said, his voice stripped of any trace of emotion. "He thinks I want a private meeting about the East Coast expansion." Emma set her cup down, her heartbeat quickening. "I want to be there." "No," Nick answered immediately, without hesitation. "This is not something you need to witness. You told me I had the right to know. You said I was part of this now." She rose to her feet, her voice not loud but impossible to dismiss. "I nearly died because of this, Nick. Marcus didn't just betray you, he tried to kill me. I deserve to look him in the eye and claim my piece of justice." Nick's gaze darkened. "And if you see what I am about to do, will you be able to forget it? Or will you carry it with you forever and see me differently because of it?" He stepped closer until only a few steps separated them, I'm not afraid of letting you see who I really am, Emma. But what will happen downstairs isn't a man. His voice dropped to a raw whisper. It's instinct. It's the darkness I've spent my entire life trying to keep chained. And I don't want you stained by it. Emma stilled at his words, seeing for the first time the weight on his shoulders, the quiet burden of a man holding back a world that could devour him if he ever slipped. But she didn't retreat. I'm stronger than you think, Nick. I know you are, he admitted. But strength doesn't mean you should bear everything. Let me carry this part. It was me, not you, who brought Marcus into this world. I taught him how to hide, how to disappear. I will be the one to end it. A car door slammed somewhere beyond the window. Both of them turned toward the sound as a black SUV rolled slowly through the gate. Marcus had arrived. Nick checked his watch. He suspects nothing. He'll head straight to the small West Side conference room where Alex is waiting. He turned back to Emma, and in his eyes was a strange mixture of regret and iron-hard resolve. You will stay here. I'll come back when it's done. He stepped closer and laid a hand gently against her cheek. His eyes held hers, as if memorizing her face before walking into something he was no longer certain he could control. Don't worry. No one on my team will let Marcus get anywhere near you again. Emma lifted her hand to his, her gaze flickering with a tremor she couldn't hide. Don't kill him because of me. If you do it, let it be because you need to end his betrayal. Nick froze for a heartbeat, then gave a slow, measured nod. I never kill because of emotion, only because of principle, and he violated both. He left the room, closing the door behind him, leaving Emma alone with the pounding of her own heartbeat and a silence so dense it felt as though the entire estate was holding its breath, waiting for the moment judgment would descend. The door opened without a sound, only the steady echo of footsteps along the thick, carpeted hallway announcing his presence, and Emma knew it was him. She lifted her gaze from the notebook lying unfinished before her, her heart tightening for a brief beat when she saw Nick step inside. The warm golden light overhead washed across his tall frame. His black shirt had been changed, the cuffs still damp, as though he had washed his hands too quickly. There was no blood, no stain, yet his face carried a silence so stark it seemed carved from stone, as if every emotion had been locked away. Emma didn't speak, nor did she ask. She simply watched his slow approach as he took the seat across from her, his hand resting on the dark wooden table, not trembling, but rigid as granite. After a long moment, he finally lifted his eyes to hers. It's done. Just 2 words, simple and clean, enough to make her chest tighten. She didn't need to ask what was done or how it had been carried out. She looked into his eyes and saw what he didn't say. An ending, one that could never be undone. She nodded slowly, accepting it as part of the world she had chosen to step into. A faint crease formed between his brows, the kind that appeared when a man was wrestling with something he could not speak aloud, or fighting to keep himself from collapsing under the weight of what he had just done. Even without seeing blood, Emma could sense the metallic trace clinging to him, not on his clothes but in the air he carried back from that room beneath the estate. She rose and walked toward him, gentle and unhurried, not questioning, not pressing. Her hand came to rest on his shoulder, soft as the rain after a storm. Nick glanced up, and his eyes softened, though deep within them was something wild, wounded, unnamed. He took her hand and drew her to sit beside him, the distance between them narrowing to a single breath. He didn't recount details, and she didn't need them. But Emma knew, through intuition, through the quiet strength of his grip, that the decision had been made not solely by logic but by months of restrained emotion. Marcus was no longer a threat, and the price of betrayal had been paid in full. Silence stretched between them until Nick finally spoke, his voice low and rough like wind moving through dry woods. I don't like this feeling. I don't like leaving you alone. I don't like that you had to see the coldness in me. I've spent a lifetime trying to bury. I didn't see anything, she said, placing her hand over his chest, where his heartbeat thudded steadily beneath her palm. I only saw a man keeping his promise at any cost. Nick looked at her as if wanting to believe, as if her words were the last thread anchoring him to the world of the living. He lowered his forehead to hers, exhaling a long, unguarded breath. She didn't pull back, didn't flinch, only tightened her hand around his. And in that moment, Nick understood he had chosen correctly. Emma didn't need the details, didn't need to witness the act. She only needed to know he was still himself, still keeping his word, still coming back. And for a man like him, that was everything. They sat beside each other for a long while without speaking, neither of them trying to fill the quiet nor soften it with hollow reassurances. Outside, the air had grown colder, and the last light of the afternoon cast muted shadows across the gray stone walls, washing the room in a subdued calm that mirrored their state of mind. Nick still held her hand, his large, warm palm enveloping hers in a steady, wordless way, neither demanding nor possessive. Slowly, Emma leaned her head onto his shoulder, a simple gesture carrying more truth than anything she had ever dared admit aloud. He didn't move, only turned slightly so that a strand of his hair brushed her forehead. That closeness made her realize she had stepped into his world far deeper than any point where turning back was possible. She was the one who finally broke the silence, her voice quiet and hesitant, as if afraid to disturb the fragile stillness between them. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked softly, "of living like this? Constantly doubting people, constantly deciding who deserves to stay alive and who has to disappear?" Nick didn't answer right away. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried a weight he could no longer hide. "Of course I do. But when you're at the top of a system where a single crack can crumble everything beneath it, exhaustion isn't a reason to stop. I didn't choose this life, Emma. It chose me. And when you're standing in the center of a storm, you only have two choices: stand firm or be swept away forever." Emma said nothing, but a wave of something warm and aching rose within her, a mix of admiration and sorrow. She could not imagine living each day in such a state, where every decision carried life or death, where trust was a luxury always paid for in blood. And yet, in that shadowed world, Nick had somehow kept a piece of his humanity intact. He knew how to return, how to protect her, even through methods no ordinary person would accept. She turned toward him, meeting his eyes directly. "Have you ever trusted someone?" she asked. "Truly trusted, not because they were useful, but because you believed they were good." Nick's lips lifted, not in a smile, but in a faint, bitter acknowledgement. "Yes, once." "And you lost them?" "I did. He chose to leave before this world had the chance to take him from me." Emma didn't ask more, but she understood. Nick had been speaking of someone who mattered, perhaps the only person who had ever broken through the armor he wore. Maybe that was why he kept his distance at first, why he hesitated whenever she came too close. But he had let her in now, and there was no going back. "I used to think everything was either right or wrong," she said quietly, "black or white. But working with you, seeing the way you make choices, I'm starting to understand that everything has reasons. Sometimes what's right doesn't feel good, and what's wrong may be the only way to survive." He was surprised by her words, but he didn't interrupt. Emma continued, her voice stronger. "I'm not sure I agree with everything you do, but I understand it, and I'm not afraid anymore." Something shifted in his eyes, something he had been waiting for far longer than she realized. Nick reached up and brushed his fingers gently against her cheek, a touch far too tender for the ruthlessness he had shown only hours before. "I don't need you to approve of me," he said softly. "I only need you here as you are. The person who makes me question the rules I once believed were unbreakable. And I will stay," Emma whispered. "If you keep your word. No lies, no secrets, and no pushing me away again." Nick nodded slowly, as if sealing a sacred pact he would not dare breach. He leaned in, pressing his lips to her forehead, a light kiss, but one that wrapped her in a warmth she had never known she needed. For the first time, Emma felt no doubt about her choice. The path ahead might be dangerous, but she knew she would no longer walk it alone. And more importantly, she realized she was ready to trust, to open her heart, to love. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the heavy curtains and illuminated the quiet office, Emma stepped inside with a calmness that felt new, almost unfamiliar. Nick stood by the wide window, a cup of black coffee in his hand as always, his gaze fixed on the garden outside where the staff had just finished clearing the remnants of last night's rain. He didn't turn, but his voice, steady and unmistakably his, drifted toward her. "Did you sleep?" Emma nodded, knowing he couldn't see it. "Yes." She walked closer and set the folder she carried onto the desk, her tone gentle but unwavering. "I want full access." Nick finally turned, his eyes narrowing not out of resistance but surprise at the timing, not the request. "Why?" "Because if I'm truly staying," she said, "if I'm stepping into your world not just as someone you want to protect, but as someone you consider a partner, then I need to know everything. No gray areas, no secrets. I can't make the right choices if I'm only seeing a fraction of the truth." Nick fell silent. He placed his cup down and walked toward her, each step slow, weighted with thought. He studied her face as though searching for hesitation, for even the faintest flicker of doubt he could use to shield her. But there was none. only the steady certainty of a woman he had come to trust, and now, one who was demanding an equal place by his side. Do you understand what that means? Emma nodded. I'll learn things no one but you has ever known. About operations, about the network, about hidden alliances that, if exposed, could destroy everything. I know what I'm asking, and I'm ready to accept whatever comes with it. But I don't want to be someone you protect. I want to be someone you can lean on when things fall apart. Nick exhaled, a slow release as if shedding the last layer of the defenses he'd held onto for years. All right. One word, simple, but carrying the full weight of a trust he had never given to anyone else. He returned to the desk, unlocked the secure cabinet with a biometric scan, and retrieved a small metal case. Inside were a coded access card and an encrypted hard drive. This is everything, he said. Communication networks, financial flows, covert agreements, alliances, and every enemy waiting in the dark. You may not like what you find in here, but I believe you'll understand it. He stepped forward and placed the case in her hands. From now on, there are no secrets between us. And if there's anything you feel you cannot accept, you have the right to walk away at any time. Emma took the case. Her hands didn't tremble, but she held it firmly, fully aware of the gravity of what this choice meant. Thank you, she said softly, for trusting me this much. Nick's lips curved in a rare smile, one without the usual chill. I don't just trust you, Emma. I need you. Not as a piece in a strategy, but as the reason I want all of this to survive. Their eyes met, deep and unguarded, and in that exchange something unspoken but unbreakable settled between them. And in that moment, with pale morning sunlight filtering through the leaves outside, Emma knew that from the second she took that case into her hands, she was no longer an outsider. She was part of Nick's world now, with all its truths, its shadows, and the absolute trust he had just placed in her. Emma sat alone in her small office within the estate, the glow from the desk lamp spilling across the unfinished pages in front of her. The metal box Nick had given her still rested on the table, a silent reminder that she now carried not only her own choices, but the unguarded trust of a man the world knew by many names, yet to her, now, he was simply Nick. She opened the lid again, letting her fingers glide over the access card and the encrypted drive as if feeling the weight of the secrets they held. Her heartbeat didn't race or falter. It beat steadily, deeply, with the quiet certainty of someone who understood the gravity of what she had accepted, and the man who had placed it in her hands. A soft knock sounded before the door opened, and Nick stepped inside. He didn't ask permission, didn't wait to be invited. He saw her there and said nothing at first, only walked toward her with deliberate calm. His eyes held no guarded edges, no cold distance, only a gentleness edged with caution, as though he were stepping into a sacred place he dared not harm. You've already looked through it? His voice was low, quiet, without pressure. Emma nodded and turned her chair to face him fully. She studied him for a moment, her gaze clear and steady, not probing, not afraid, just the look of someone who knew the choice she was about to make would change everything. I'm not just staying, Nick, she said softly. I'm working with you. Not as someone you protect, but as someone who stands beside you, who carries the weight with you and makes the choices with you. Nick didn't respond right away. His eyes moved over her slowly, as though memorizing every detail of her face. Then he stepped forward and took a seat beside her, closing the space he once kept carefully measured. Do you understand what that means? He asked quietly. It means if I fall, you fall with me. It means every decision you make from now on won't be about morality alone, it will be strategy, survival. Emma tilted her head slightly, her voice unwavering. Then let's survive together. The moment the words left her lips, their eyes met, and for an instant, it felt as though the world around them grew still, listening to the shared rhythm of two hearts beating in unison. Nick lifted his hand, brushing his fingertips gently along her cheek, so lightly it was as if he feared she might break if he touched her too firmly. But Emma didn't pull away. She leaned into his palm, her lips parting in a whisper he didn't need to hear to understand. He bent toward her slowly, as though crossing a distance longer than any path he had ever walked in his life. And when his lips finally touched hers, there was no calculation, no defense, only truth. It wasn't a kiss of urgency or possession. It was an admission, a promise, a quiet carving of the fact that they had crossed a boundary from which there was no return. When they parted, neither spoke right away. Emma rested her forehead against his, a rare, soft smile touching her lips, the first since she had stepped into Nick's world. Her voice was barely more than a breath. I'm here, Nick, and I'm not going anywhere. Nick closed his fingers around hers, holding on as though she were the only anchor keeping him from sinking back into the darkness he knew too well. In that moment, though, the world outside remained chaotic, dangerous, and unforgiving here, in this room, between two people who once came from opposite edges of life. Something had finally settled. And from that moment on, Emma was no longer the employee cast out into the rain. She was a partner, a companion, the one part of the shadows into which Nick allowed a sliver of light to slip through. From the moment Emma officially stepped into Nick's world as a true partner, everything within the estate seemed to fall into a new rhythm. No longer were there wary glances from the security teams or the household staff. Instead, there was a quiet, unmistakable respect, built through concise briefings, decisive problem-solving, and, most of all, through her constant presence beside Nick in the central operations room. Emma wasn't there merely to observe. She began by reviewing the transaction tracking system, quickly uncovering a string of suspicious activities that appeared nowhere in any report. With her background in financial analysis, she immediately recognized them as indirect withdrawals routed through an unidentified intermediary and disguised as equipment maintenance fees at various satellite facilities. When she presented her findings before the senior team, a few doubtful looks flickered around the room, but Nick simply glanced at her and nodded in calm acknowledgement. And once Paul verified the information as entirely accurate, the atmosphere shifted at once. She didn't need to prove anything further, yet she continued anyway. Within 2 weeks, Emma was working alongside the technical division to rebuild the automated reporting system, removing weak points that could leak information. She proposed a new encryption tool that significantly strengthened data security, and most notably, created a real-time risk assessment matrix that even Nick admitted was more sophisticated than anything he had used before. Her influence didn't stop at operations. Emma accompanied Nick to high-level partner meetings, sometimes as a quiet observer, other times as the person who asked the pointed questions that no one else dared voice. During one confidential negotiation with representatives of an international investment front, she spotted a seemingly minor clause that, if signed, would have stripped Nick of control over a substantial portion of future profits. She not only identified the issue but offered a revised clause the other side couldn't refuse while preserving Nick's authority. After that meeting, Alex, head of security and once the person most skeptical of her, rested a hand lightly on her shoulder and said only one short sentence, weighted with meaning. "From now on, you're one of us." Nick watched all of this in silence. He didn't praise her in front of the others, but each night, when they returned to their room and shared a glass of wine by the fire, he listened as she walked him through every detail, every deduction, every new idea. She spoke not out of obligation, but with the passion of someone who had finally found where she belonged. One night, after Emma completed the restructuring of the southern supply chain, once suspected of harboring an inside threat, she leaned quietly against Nick's shoulder. He slipped an arm around her, his eyes fixed on the flames dancing in the hearth. "You've done more than I ever expected," Nick murmured, his voice no longer the cold steel the world knew, but something warm, proud, and deeply sincere. Emma smiled and gave his hand a small squeeze. "I'm not done. You haven't seen everything I'm capable of." Nick let out a soft laugh, then pressed a kiss to her hair. "I don't need to see it all. I just need to know I chose the right person." In the flickering glow of the fire, with the quiet crackle of burning wood filling the room, they sat together like two final pieces that had finally found their place after so many trials. And for the first time, Nick's organization wasn't stronger because of power alone, but because of the presence of someone who brought depth, strategy, and something it had never truly had before: a heart. That morning, with pale golden sunlight streaming sideways through the large dining room curtains, Nick set his coffee cup down and looked at Emma with an expression that felt both unfamiliar and deeply familiar at once. They had spent weeks working side by side, analyzing the smallest details in the system, facing tense situations together, sharing quiet but warm dinners by the fireplace, but this silence between them carried a different weight. His voice was almost casual, as if he were inviting her for a walk in the park, or to watch an ordinary football game. "Are you free this weekend?" Emma looked up, her brow lifting slightly as she waited for the rest. "My mother wants to meet you," he continued. "Not as a colleague or a partner, just as my mother." His gaze softened, touched by a rare hesitation in a man who always controlled every inch of his world. He explained that his mother lived a few hours away, in the quiet countryside of Wisconsin, in a small wooden house nestled among quiet hills. She knew little about his work, only that he was busy and seldom came home. Emma studied him then, and she saw more clearly than ever that behind the cold precision and unbreakable exterior was a son who had spent years protecting a pocket of peace for the woman who raised him. She nodded without needing to think. "I'll go." That weekend, they set out at dawn. Nick drove himself, with no security, no signs of the world they usually navigated. The long drive didn't feel rushed. They talked about simple things. Emma told him about her childhood in a small western town, about her father teaching her to read financial newspapers when she was only 12. Nick spoke about the summer he was 16, the last time he helped his mother fix the roof after a heavy storm. When the car turned onto a dirt road leading up a hill and the wooden house appeared in the middle of a field of blooming lavender, Emma felt her heart quicken unexpectedly. Nick's mother stood on the porch, small in stature but bright-eyed and warm-faced. She hugged her son the way mothers do, with children they see too rarely, then turned to Emma with a smile so welcoming that Emma immediately felt at home. Lunch was simple roasted meat, pie, and vegetable soup. They sat beneath a canopy of bougainvillea, listening to birdsong and the soft rustling of leaves. Nick's mother talked about his childhood, how he had always been the quiet one, the one who protected his younger brother from bullies. Emma laughed at the story of him climbing a tree to skip school, then fell silent when the older woman shared how, after his father died, Nick stopped allowing anyone to see his vulnerable side. After lunch, when Nick helped his mother inside for her nap, Emma wandered through the small garden, letting her fingers brush over the pale purple petals. Everything here felt impossibly peaceful, like a world untouched by the life she and Nick lived day to day. And in that moment, among the flowers and soft breeze, she realized something she had been moving toward for a long time. She loved him, not because of the power he held or the way he commanded every room he walked into, but because of the little things, the tenderness he reserved for his mother, the quiet way he watched her during meetings, the way he always let her choose and never asked her to be anything other than herself. When Nick returned and saw her standing quietly in the garden, he walked to her without a word. They stood side by side, their hands brushing in a gesture simple yet full of meaning. Emma turned to him, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her gaze, no guarded distance. She didn't say she loved him. She didn't need to. Everything she felt was already there in the way she looked at him, in the quiet steadiness of her breath, and in the gentle pressure of their intertwined fingers beneath the peaceful sky. As night settled over the quiet hills, the thin silver wash of moonlight stretched across the treetops like a piece of silk, and Nick and Emma sat together on the long bench behind the wooden house. There were no city lights, no traffic sounds, only the hum of crickets and the faint scent of nightgrass drifting through the air. Nick remained silent for a long time, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed on the distant darkness as though searching for a memory long buried. Emma sat beside him without urging him to speak, sensing something deep and unspoken stirring within him, and she waited with all the patience her heart knew how to offer. At last he spoke, his voice low and rough, each word sounding like a thin slice of the past being exposed. He once had a younger brother named Daniel, 3 years younger, always smiling, always believing the world had room for good people. Emma tilted her head slightly, listening. When their father died, their mother broke down, and Nick learned that sometimes protecting others required choices no ethics book had ever prepared him for. Daniel wasn't like him. Daniel believed in the law, in justice. But once, during an incident tied to the remnants of their father's organization, Daniel tried to do the right thing. He reported the wrongdoing to someone he believed he could trust. 3 days later, Daniel died in what was officially deemed a car accident, but Nick knew he had been silenced, eliminated by people within their own ranks to protect a secret. Nick discovered the truth too late, when every shred of evidence had already vanished. He couldn't punish the ones responsible without dragging his mother and countless innocents into the fallout. From that moment on, he made a vow that nothing like that would ever happen again. But he also stopped believing that love could survive in his world without becoming a fatal weakness. Nick turned to Emma, his eyes quiet but so deep they made her heart tighten. Until you came along, you're not like Daniel. You're not naive. You see the darkness and still choose to stay, not out of blindness, but because you understand it. I can't promise I'll keep you safe forever, but if you agree to walk with me, I swear I will fight to my last breath to protect you. Emma didn't answer right away. She looked into his eyes and saw the wound that had never healed. The lost time could not erase. But she also saw love spoken not through grand declarations, but through choices made again and again, each day, without fail. She lifted her hand and touched his cheek, her palm soft as the moonlight above them. I don't need a perfect world, Nick. I just need to know that when I reach out, it's your hand that takes mine. Whatever happens, however dark the road becomes, I won't step back. I choose you, Not because I believe you'll never be wrong, but because I trust that if you lose your way, I can be the one who helps you find it again." Nick turned his head slightly and pressed a slow, reverent kiss to her palm, a gesture free of haste, yet filled with promise. In that moment, Emma knew she had stepped into a journey with no return path, but she wasn't afraid, because the man sitting beside her with all his wounds, his shadows, and the losses he carried was the only person she wanted by her side, in every battle and in every remaining moment of her life. The candlelight shimmered across the long wooden table set in the garden behind the villa, where the lavender bushes were blooming in the soft late summer breeze. The night sky was clear, the full moon hanging in the distance like a silent witness to a new beginning. Nick poured wine into the 2 glass cups, his gaze meeting Emma's with a gentleness she had never seen in him before. She sat there in a simple cream-colored dress, her face without elaborate makeup yet glowing with a quiet peace. They did not speak much. Time no longer seemed to move, but slowed just enough for them to feel the meaning of this moment. It was not an ending, nor was it entirely a new beginning. It was a continuation, a new chapter in the journey they had chosen together, not out of obligation, not forced by circumstance, but because they had come to understand themselves and chosen each other. Nick raised his glass, his eyes never leaving Emma. "Thank you for not turning away when I showed you the ugliest parts of who I am." Emma touched her glass to his and smiled. "I stayed not because you're perfect, but because you're brave enough to face what isn't." The soft clink of their glasses echoed gently in the quiet garden. In the warm glow of the candles, they shared each bite of food, each small story, each silence filled with understanding. There was no need for grand vows or impossible promises. All that mattered was that each morning, when they opened their eyes, the other would still be there. Nick and Emma's story is a reminder of something simple. Sometimes love doesn't grow from perfection, but from acceptance and the willingness to heal together. Everyone carries wounds, pasts, and shadows. But if you meet someone patient enough, sincere enough, then even in the harshest and most dangerous world, love can still take root quietly, but steadfastly. And now, as they begin rebuilding everything, not just the organization, but a home, a sense of trust, a place to return to, they know the road ahead will not be easy. But what matters most is that they no longer walk it alone. My dear friend, what do you think about Nick and Emma's journey? Have you ever faced a choice in your own life where your heart and your reason fought fiercely against each other? Does this story remind you of someone, or something, from your past or your present? We truly hope to hear your feelings. Please leave a comment below and share the thoughts from deep within your heart. And if this story brought you emotion, empathy, or a new perspective on love, trust, and healing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to enjoy many more meaningful and compelling stories every day. We are always here, ready to tell you stories that touch emotions, stir the soul, and inspire deep reflections about life. Wishing you good health, a joyful and peaceful life, and a heart filled with the very best things. See you in the next video. Goodbye, and have a wonderful day.